Good evening. Hi. Thank you for joining us. Before we start, let us take a moment to remember our transgender siblings who we have lost due to anti-transgender bigotry and violence. Thank you. Welcome to the lived experiences of transgender service members and veterans, and thank you to our panel, U.S. Navy veteran Paula Nira, Maryland Defense Force Master Sergeant Karen Holmes, and Georgetown alumna and U.S. Army veteran Charlotte Clymer for being with us tonight. This event would not be possible without them, and also without the collaborative efforts of the McDonough School of Business's Queer Affinity Group out at MSB, the Georgetown University Student Veteran Association, GUSVA, Grad Pride, and the Military Law Society, as well as the support of McCourt Civil Military Association and the McDonough Military Association. And of course, thank you. And of course, the sponsorship of our Veterans Office, the Tagliabue Initiative for LGBTQ Life, the LGBTQ Resource Center, and the Center for Social Justice. Together, we are Spectral Alliance, a coalition of queer affinity groups and allies working together to elevate marginalized identities, as well as celebrate our various intersecting identities. Lastly, I want to recognize our service members in the audience, specifically our guests from Navy Spectrum, the Genders and Sexualities Alliance Club from the United States Naval Academy. As a 2007 graduate of the Naval Academy, it inspires me and motivates me to see them with us. I remember as a midshipman being in the closet, afraid and unsure about my future as a naval officer. I'm Nick Marak, the president of Grad Pride, a US Navy veteran, and I served during and after Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Our special panel tonight will provide their unique experiences, which combined span from the early 80s when women first matriculated to the service academies, but still a time when gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people were either banned from serving or were forced to serve in silence. Two of our panelists tonight witnessed firsthand the ban of gay, lesbian, and bisexual service members lifted by President Clinton in 1994, but with a compromise. Under the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy, they had to remain silent about their sexual identity, or in other words, in the closet. For Paula and Karen and other transgender service members, they were still barred from revealing their gender identities or banned completely from enlisting under the premise of their gender identity disorder. 17 years later, during President Obama's administration, significant progress occurred in the US military. As we saw the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell in 2010, allowing gay, lesbian, and bisexual service members to openly serve. Additionally, all roles and positions in the US military became open to women. And finally, on June 30, 2016, the Pentagon lifted the ban on transgender people in the US military and acknowledged that it is in the military's best interest to recruit and retain the best troops regardless of their gender identity, which provided transgender service members access to the necessary medical health care they needed. Unfortunately, the lift of the ban was short-lived, as President Trump on July 26, 2017, released a series of tweets announcing, "The United States government will not accept or allow transgender individuals to serve in any capacity in the US military." According to the current policy, service members must serve while identifying with the gender associated with their biological sex, and any applicant who has received medical transition treatment is disqualified. Currently, the Department of Defense knows of 1,400 service members who identify as transgender in the United States military. With that, I turn to our panel. Paula Nira is a 1985 Distinguished U.S. Naval Academy graduate. She served as a surface warfare officer and a reserve officer. She is a Desert Storm veteran with decorations including 3 Navy Commendation Medals, the Navy Achievement Medal, and the Combat Action Ribbon. Karen Kendrick Holmes is a Master Sergeant in the Maryland Defense Force under the Maryland National Guard. She received the NCO Non-Commissioned Officer Soldier of the Year by the Maryland State Guard Association and the Maryland Defense Force. In 2013, she was the Soldier of the Year by the State Guard Association of the United States out of 24 states and 23,000 soldiers. Charlotte Clymer enlisted in the U.S. Army prior to attending West Point, and she is a 2016 Georgetown alumna. She is the press secretary for the Rapid Response at the Human Rights Campaign. She serves on the D.C. Commission for Persons with Disabilities, the board for the Center for Law and Military Policy, the Military and Veterans Advisory Council for Outserved Service Members Legal Defense Network, and the Advisory Council for Running Start and the Lone Star Parity Project. Thank you, Paula, Karen, and Charlotte, for being with us tonight. Paula, would you like to be the first to share with us your experience in the U.S. Navy, as well as your work in regard to the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell?
Sure. Thanks, everybody, for being here, and it's great to get a chance to be with you. Now I'm going to have to slide around so that I can, where do you want me to point this? That works. Oh. So, phrases. You know, those phrases you learn that you spend the rest of your life living by, you know, your guides. So, for those of you here at Georgetown, ad maiorem Dei gloriam, which I learned at Regis High School back in New York, for the greater glory of God, the great phrase of the Jesuits. Now, that's the original Latin, and when you translate it into English, it translates as, go Navy, beat Army. So we talk about, you know, I am probably the ancient mariner. Is my service in the Navy predates Don't Ask, Don't Tell. It was at a time when I went for my pre-appointment physical. And on the medical form, the question was right there. Are you a homosexual? Now, at the time, I was wrestling with my gender identity. Kind of figured out that I'm really female. But knowing it and accepting it are not the same thing. And also, when you realize when you're 8 or 9 years old that your calling is the Navy, accepting who you are in 1981, and you can tell in my voice how tough this is. That was not an option. But they didn't ask, are you a transsexual? Which was the language they would have used then. Instead, they asked, have you ever seen a psychiatrist for a mental health issue? And in the 1970s, we didn't know anything for kids or adolescents, so I could honestly say, nope, never did that. And went to the academy and was in the Navy up through Desert Storm. That's actually a recruiting poster from the 1970s, and the Navy, I don't think, has any clue when it says serve with pride what that means for the LGBT military community. One of the things we'll talk about is, you know, as we have the conversation with everybody is, you know, what drives what I do today? Today, I'm the clinical program director of the Johns Hopkins Center for Transgender Health. Besides being a Navy veteran and a naval officer, I'm also a lawyer, and I'm also a registered nurse. And what drives me was that oath. Because if you swear true faith and allegiance, when you deny people access to medically necessary care just because of somebody else's prejudice, that offends the Constitution. And while I had to sacrifice my naval career to accept who I was, I'm one of those veterans who doesn't believe that the obligation to end when I changed my clothes. So that is still a guiding light for me. And that's what I look like. That's me at war. To show how unique this voyage has been, we're going to name one of our new oilers after Harvey Milk. LGBTQ icon. Every ship in the class is named after a civil rights leader. The lead ship is going to be named after John Lewis. And every ship in the fleet has a couple of sponsors. Now, your job is to imbue the command with your spirit, your character, your personality. It's really a ceremonial post for most folks. And the two sponsors of the Harvey Milk are Senator Dianne Feinstein and myself. And trying to explain what a sponsor is, people say, well, it's like the godmother. And people think when I say godmother, I'm thinking bippity boppity boop. And when I say the godmother, I'm thinking more of, I'm going to make offers they can't refuse. So, different perspective. And one of the last things, when we talk about identity and stuff, and when we talk about mission first, when we're talking about transgender people in the military, particularly for those who come to this issue from a civil rights and a social justice perspective, more so than a military perspective, it's important to understand that we're not talking about transgender people who happen to find themselves in the military. We're talking about sailors and soldiers and Marines and airmen and Coast Guardsmen who happen to be transgender. And that's a very, very distinct difference in priority. And, we talk about identity. For me, my identity is wrapped up in blue and gold. I make no bones about it. And yeah, that phrase pretty much sums it up as far as how I approach things. Thanks.
Okay.
Okay, well, my name is Karen Kendra Holmes, and right now with the United States Veterans Reserve Corps, I just got promoted last month to Master Sergeant. So,
Hey.
that's a nice picture, I like that. Anyway, I wanted to show this because when I saw this, I said, wow, look at this. We have no idea who's inside that box, whether it's male or female, whether they're transgender or not. So it hit hard to me in my heart to say, that's the person that's serving our country. It didn't matter, whether who they were, they're who they are. And in this box is somebody who served for their country and was killed in the process of it. On the left, that's who I used to be. That's Tony. And of course, this is me now. It was a tough decision when I transitioned. It was something that was deep in my heart about doing. And it took me years to figure it out. Actually, on my business card that some of you already have the tagline says, 40 years and wandering no more. That's because it took me 40 years to figure this crap out. It's just basically going on and on, dressing, undressing, constantly throwing away clothes. I got hiding places back then that nobody would ever know, not even my ex-wife knew about it. But anyway, the interesting part about this when I decided to come out to my family and stuff, with my brother, it was no problem. He was totally okay. He just said, let me, adjust and stuff like that. With my father, after 5 minutes of telling him, he was totally okay. But I elaborated a little bit more. And I said, by now, do you have any questions? And he said, well, I got one question. And I go, what's that? Are you going to keep your last name? And I said, yes. And he was totally okay. But here's the one that really takes it to heart. When I talked to my mom, something she had never told me before, but when I told her what my name was going to be, which is Karen, she said when she was pregnant, if she had a girl, she was going to name it Karen. I totally lost it that day because I said, now I know for sure this is who I truly am. This is me getting my NCO Soldier of the Year award from the state of Maryland in the Maryland Association. I was so shocked when I heard them call my name. I was like, for like 4 seconds sitting there like, who did they say? And I came up, received the award, and afterward, a lot of the female soldiers came up to me and they said, thank you, you're doing it for us. And I said to myself, because I couldn't tell anybody because they didn't know, I said, that's true, because that's who I am in my mind, heart, and spirit as being a woman. But I couldn't tell them. But I did know one thing. Deep down inside, I said, I'm doing it for the transgender community, which I couldn't really say. And it was hard because you know where your heart is, but yet you can't really say anything about it. You know who you truly are, and you want to express it because you want to give credit to our community, but you can't say anything just yet. And this is me getting my Soldier of the Year of the country by the State Guard Association of the United States. Here again, I was totally shocked when I went down to a conference down in South Carolina, and they called my name. And it was so funny because one of the soldiers that I went down with, I actually had a gown that I was going to wear that night for the ball. And she goes, no, you need to wear your uniform. And I'm like, does she know something I didn't know? But apparently, she knew I was going to get this award. One thing, when I joined the Maryland Defense Force back in 2011, I had no idea. I've always wanted to serve, but I never knew what was going on. My life just took a totally different turn for the best. And I think when it finally came out in 2011, actually 2010 is when I actually transitioned full time, it was great. Being totally happy 150%. That was who I really was, finally being myself. And then joining the Maryland Defense Force in 2011 and getting commendation awards such as, Leadership Award going through IET, and none of the soldiers knew. Eventually, about 10 of them did know before the big story came out on ABC 2 News out of Baltimore. And that was because I had the big surgery in April 8th of 2016. So ABC 2 News out of Baltimore did the big story. And of course, they were out of Baltimore, and that's where our regiment was, up in Baltimore. So everybody on the command staff knew at that point. And going back to drill that following month, I was really, really nervous and scared because I wasn't sure just how the rest of the regiment was going to feel about me being transgender and finding out. But the thing is, after I came back, nobody treated me any different. They followed my directions. They supported my decisions when I gave them orders. The interesting thing, one time when we were leaving the base on drill night, we came out the gate and there's this accident that had just happened. And of course, I was the NCO soldier at the time being. I said, hey, let's help out at this accident. You do this, do this, and everybody did it. And here, everybody's off duty, but yet they followed my direction. And I felt really great about the fact that they listened and they respected my decision right then, which they could have probably just said, we're out of here, I'm going home. Whoops. Last year, I did a TEDx talk up in Ashbury Park, New Jersey. So if you Google my name, Karen Holmes TEDx, you'll hear my 10-minute short story of my whole entire, well, I can't say whole entire life because it's tough to stick 8 years at that point into 10 minutes. But yet I was able to do it and got a lot of phone calls and respect from it. And then I right now host a radio show. It happens like once a month, maybe every other month. It's on Inside Out Radio. And there we talk about transgender issues and stuff like that. And I constantly will talk about, being in service and stuff like that. Need to have you two on there one day. And it's really great. I mean, to be able to sit across the mic and talk to somebody else and say, hey, what's going on in your life? What can we get the audience to understand? Which a lot of people don't seem to understand. We're not what you see on Jerry Springer show. We're doing great things out there. We're soldiers. There's military, fire, police, nurses, doctors, judges, politicians now. We've got actors and actresses out there. So we're doing great things out there. So when somebody tells you that this is what they believe a transgender person is like, they don't have any idea, but you do, and you will hear about it from us here tonight on this stage, the kind of life that we lead in serving our country in any kind of way that we can. So just really take heart to that. For me personally, tonight by the time we finish, if you hear something like somebody saying something negative about us, no. I know somebody I met tonight, and they're transgender, and they're doing great things out there. My awards, I take honor in it. In 2015, I was among 31 other women from around the world for up and coming aspiring females with a platform. And in that magazine, I was the only transgender woman in that magazine. So it was pretty cool. And in 2015, I got honored in the LGBT nations as one of the top 50 successful transgender Americans you need to know. And guess what? Caitlyn Jenner wasn't in it. And that's it.
I don't think I brought slides. I'm pretty sure I. Oh, well, okay, good. All right. Just making sure. Well, it is such an honor to be here tonight at my alma mater. I feel like it was only yesterday I was in the closet here at Georgetown as trans. At the time, I identified as non-binary, and I was making the big preparation to come out of the closet as a trans woman and begin that long process. And I was just, I remember the support we had on campus for LGBTQ students, for veterans. So this is just a great institution in general for the student body across the board, and it's just great to be here. I am so honored to be next to these two women who came before me and paved a way for trans women like me in the service. And I cannot thank them enough for doing that. Y'all are heroes to me, and I appreciate you. And then finally, Nick, in spite of his Naval Academy creds, he is just a solid human being and has worked so hard to put this event on. I greatly appreciate him and the entire staff for getting this done. I knew from a very early age that I was trans. I didn't know the word trans, but I knew that there was something off about me that was incongruent with the rest of the world. And to make a long story short, my way of negotiating this was to embrace masculine rites of passage, so to speak. So, I was very, on the straight and narrow. I, played high school football. I graduated high school and then went into the military. And I joined the military primarily because I love my country and I wanted to serve. And although I disagreed with the war at the time, I felt that I should take part in that sacrifice. But I would be lying to you if I said that a small part of me didn't wonder if maybe this will be the thing that finally cleanses me of this need to be a woman. And what was so interesting about my time in the military is that if anything, it only confirmed the dread within my soul that, no, this is really who you are and it's not going away. And it took a long time for me to embrace it as part of the authentic self that I've been blessed with by God, rather than something that was in my brain and eating away at it. It takes a long time to get there, and I wouldn't be here talking tonight about this were it not for all the trans folks who came before me and made being transgender and authentic in our own skin something to be proud of, to be acknowledged, and to have a full stake in the public square as citizens of this country. And certainly, not a population that has to be maligned by our elected officials and by the public at large. And so these are heroes on stage with me right now. They're the ones who were out when it was really hard to be out. I have it relatively easier, under this administration, maybe not so much. But back then it was really, really tough. And so again, I thank y'all. I want to be very clear tonight in my role. I'm a press secretary for Rapid Response at the Human Rights Campaign. It's the nation's largest LGBTQ organization. My day-to-day job is doing rapid response efforts to the White House and federal policy. So you can imagine that any tweets that come up at 3 a.m., I'm the one responding to those. As you can probably imagine, I'm tired a lot lately. And part of my platform or my portfolio is addressing the ban on trans service. And it's so interesting. What I tell folks when I talk to them who aren't aware of this issue is that we do have contentious issues in our country right now, whether it's gun reform or abortion or LGBTQ rights in general, or maybe fiscal issues that are complicated. And often, not always, but often there's nuance there that can be appreciated. there really are points of conflict that can only be resolved through substantial discussion. I want to be clear, this is not one of them. The ban on trans people in the military is completely without merit across the board. Every argument put forward by the elected officials who had proposed it, and I'm not going to name them, I don't think that would be appropriate, but those who are advocating for it are putting forward very bad faith arguments, and at the cost of not only those who are directly affected, our trans service members, but this country at large. There were 14,000 trans service members when the ban officially went into effect earlier this year, an estimated 14,000. These are folks who have served honorably, many of them in the closet, of course, many of them out, and they did so without incident. Every chief of staff, or excuse me, every uniformed head of every branch testified before the Senate Armed Services Committee last year in 2018. The Commandant of the Marine Corps, the Chief of Naval Operations, Army Chief of Staff, Air Force Chief of Staff, and they all said to a person very clearly, under oath before the Senate committee, that there had been no issues of military readiness or unit cohesion in the time that the ban had been lifted and trans people had been allowed to serve openly. Zero issues, no effect. So if these top flight officers who have served their country for more than 3 decades, who are leading with integrity and who have an obligation to tell the truth to the American people and to the representatives of the American people, are saying there's no issue, folks, there's no issue. This comes up again and again. It came up with men of color serving earlier in our country's history. It came up with integration in 1947, 1948, with Truman rescinding the ban on integration. It came up with women serving. It came up with don't ask, don't tell. Again and again, it's the same arguments that it'll cost too much somehow, that it will affect unit readiness and military readiness and unit cohesion, and that it's somehow immoral. And yet again and again and again, we see these arguments fall away. And what happens? There's integration, people are allowed to serve, and there are no issues. How about that? 3 years, 0 issues with trans people serving in the military. And so we're going to talk about a lot of things tonight, but what I want to do is when you walk away tonight, I want you to be able to tell anyone who you engage in a conversation with us on that, look, you can have your personal beliefs, but when it comes to the efficacy of arguments against trans people in the military, there is 0 merit. That's not based on feelings, that's based on the factual information we have. So thank you so much, and I'm really happy to be here tonight. And go Army, beat Navy.
Thank you. So given the contentious environment, particularly some of the anti-transgender discourse that seems to populate our media, our social media, and the news, could you provide your coming out story and any advice to folks that may be questioning right now, especially our friends that may be in the military as well?
Well, back in the day, in talking about coming out, is when I finally accepted who I was, when I stopped trying to run away from it, there wasn't anybody to talk to. Merely asking for help would have been the end of my career. There was no community. There was no internet. I literally believed that I was the only transgender person in the Navy. In coming out, I finally got to the point where I accepted who I was because, that little voice in your head. I was on a destroyer. We were nuclear weapons capable. We did a security alert, and I had an M14 rifle and a magazine of live ammunition. And that little voice says, you can load this weapon and blow your brains out. And there's nobody on this planet right now that can stop you. And all the pain goes away. And of course, my reaction to that was Whiskey Tango Foxtrot. Where the hell did that come from? With 30 years of reflection, that was God telling me, you can't run anymore. Now, it didn't mean I responded right away, because I got selected to go be a naval aviator, which is what I said I wanted to do when I went to the Naval Academy and I was a surface warfare officer, because my eyes were tough from being a history major. So I got down to Pensacola, and I sabotaged my flight physical, because I didn't think that I would be able to complete 20 years in the closet. I didn't know if that voice would ever come back. And if I had gotten my wings, I would have owed enough service that would have been obligated service. And I never wanted to leave. Don't get me wrong. I never wanted to leave. So that was the first action about coming out and not saying a word about what I was doing. So I went into the reserves, and then Kuwait got invaded. And I had been in the Persian Gulf when we were reflagging Kuwaiti tankers. So I was one of about 100 officers in the Navy that had done mine warfare in the Persian Gulf in the 1980s. So I had experience that was very unique. So I volunteered to go back on active duty. And eventually, in 1991, I was back on active duty. And that was past my obligated service. So my time beyond what I owed from graduating from the Naval Academy was my tour in a minefield. And I got accepted into a program that would have allowed me to come back on active duty as a reservist full time. And again, nobody knows because you can't come out. So when I got home from Desert Storm, I realized, hey, I got to be me. So I resigned my reserve commission, went to Charleston, South Carolina, got my ears pierced, started changing my name, started living as who I was, and 2 months later, the Navy calls me and says, we're looking for Lieutenant Nira. I'm like, well, you know I resigned. I'm not in the Navy anymore. We'll make that go away. You got accepted. We want you back on active duty. When you want to go to department head school? So I would get up in the morning, go sit on the beach, look at the ships going in and out of the Charleston Naval Base, and cry my eyes out. And I did it for a week, and at the end of the week, I realized I got to say no. It was the hardest decision in my life. That was my coming out and accepting who I was and starting to live authentically as who I was. And the Navy didn't find out about why this fast-track officer, all the doodads, all the right stuff for my career, just walked away. They found out because then in 2014, we petitioned the Navy to update my DD-214, which is the discharge paperwork you get when you leave the military, to have my correct name on it. And lo and behold, for the very first time ever, the Navy did that. So I'm the first transgender Navy veteran to have my name corrected on my military records. So officially, for the U.S. Navy, I'm Lieutenant Paul Nira. It was important to me because when I die, my tombstone, either at the Columbarium at Arlington or back at school in Annapolis, is finally going to have the right name on it. So that's the long-winded story of the coming out.
Well, for me, it was tough because I joined the Maryland Defense Force after my transition. So all of my documentations were all in my new legal name and gender marker, which was great, except for my birth certificate. And when I joined, I didn't have to have the birth certificate. All I had to do was have either the birth certificate or my passport. So I said, great. But then I had to worry about, what about getting a physical? And for them, I could see my own doctor for the physical. So I was like, that's even better, because then that way I can get cleared that way. And that worked out perfect for me with them. My biggest issue every time I went was being exposed, because I really wanted to serve my country in any way I could, and actually for the Maryland Defense Force, for the state. But I kept always in the back of my mind wondering, what if I get exposed or find out? Is that going to end my career with the Maryland Defense Force? So that was a constant worry on me all the time. And then when I had my first visit at Camp Fetter for the weekend, as soon as I got on base, went into the barrack, because I hadn't had the surgery yet, beeline to the bathroom and hit the shower area, because I wanted to find out how I was going to do this so I could be out on the deck, for muster in the morning. And of course, the biggest issue, which is probably still an issue now in the military, you've got communal shower. So going in there, it's not like it is at some places where you can get to a shower head, you've got a curtain around you. This is wide open. So I really worried about that when I first got there. And I'm like checking it out, because coming in, you've got shower heads on both sides of the wall here. And the back side was no shower heads. So what I did was I took the last shower head down in the corner where I could face away from any other female troops that were there that day, so nobody could see with my back. So that was really, really tough, but it worked out good. I had a good little plan there. And most women are very self-conscious about themselves. So getting dressed, they all go to the head, and they dressed and changed, and their order went back to the room. Of course, I had a roommate, but it was no big deal then. But I still worried about that because of the fact, okay, changing in front of my roommate, was not going to be an issue? But of course, we're both doing what most women do. They'll kind of like conceal themselves and change and whatnot. So it's like, I know a lot of you women are shaking your heads, yeah. So it made it really, really, really easy in that case. So the entire weekend was pretty good. Of course, I take a lot of selfies in my living room, with my mom's section of the house as well. Losing my voice here. And behind us, when I take it in the living room up there, you've got this portrait behind us. When I take the picture, it is my brother, my mom, and my old self. And of course, I had a couple of soldiers go, I saw your picture in the living room, it looks great. Is that you in the picture? And I'm like, and I wasn't gonna lie to him. I go, yeah, it's me. And it happened to be one of my captains. And he's totally kept it quiet and cool. And he said, you're not only a good soldier, but you're a good friend too. So I was like, well, this is good. Working out pretty good. Nobody's blabbering that I'm transgender yet. And of course, everything kept being pretty quiet and low-key. Nobody said anything to any of the other soldiers. We got along great. And then it came to when I had the surgery, and ABC 2 News did the story. That's when it really broke out. And they did that particularly to not do it any earlier than that, because they wanted to protect my identity and me coming out. And so when I came back, everyone from the general on down were really happy, and they said, what a great story you did. And they said, we're here to support you, there's no issues. Some of my command, they said, if we're ever asked, they would say, what transgender person? You know, they were really gonna protect me to make sure I stayed in. Because I think what I think they valued was the fact of what I was bringing to the organization. And they really wanted to support me because they didn't want to lose me. And that was great to know that they really valued who I was. So that's it.
So my 6 years in the Army coincided with the last 6 years that Don't Ask, Don't Tell was in place. In fact, the day I left the military, I think was within a week of Don't Ask, Don't Tell officially ending, after, of course, the bill passed Congress and was signed by President Obama. And what I remember about being in under Don't Ask, Don't Tell were a few things. Number one, my My personal journey was interesting. I took the ASVAB. I did really well on it. I got a high GT score, and I remember the recruiter going, "You can do anything you want, anything. You can do intelligence. You can go into foreign languages, whatever you want." Like, I want to go infantry. And he's like, "You can do anything you want. You can go intelligence, foreign training." And he was an infantry sergeant. He had been a drill sergeant and everything, and he made it lovingly clear he did not think that was the right path for me. But no, I was very gung-ho, and that's what I wanted to do. And at the time, this was before the combat exclusion ban was lifted, so infantry units were all male. And I just had this, I was a very self-righteous little shit, to be honest with you. I thought, I'm against the war, but if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it right. And I'm going to go in infantry, I'm going to serve in the ground troops, and that's what I'm going to do. And I remember getting to my unit and thinking within a week of getting there, this is the worst thing I've ever done. What a mistake. And it was really a trial by fire for character. It was confronting the worst demons within me and, having the gauntlet thrown down. Like, am I going to overcome this and, grow as a person, or am I going to let it, basically consume me? And so for those 6 years, it was this process of really the pre-coming out, being forced to reconcile my future with where I felt I was as a person. I'll tell you what, there were two competing narratives at the time, or two competing cultural narratives at the time in the military under Don't Ask, Don't Tell in the final years. There were the people who just didn't care, or were pro-LGBTQ, and this was not just and I don't mean to be stereotypical here, but I will be for some of the civilians in the audience. This isn't just like file clerks. I mean, this were. I remember big Army Ranger Master Sergeants who were just like, who cares if gays serve in the military? It doesn't matter. Can they get the job done? Can they meet the standard? That's all that matters. One standard. Either you meet it or you don't. So there are a lot of people who felt that way, and the military was not overcome with homophobic, transphobic sentiment. At the same time, the people who were homophobic, transphobic, biphobic were very much so, and they made it clear that they were. And so this, extreme minority within the military was quite vocal and really dominated the overall cultural element of LGBTQ folks in the closet in the military. When I did get to West Point, that's when the peak of the Don't Ask, Don't Tell debate was going on. My plebe year, and I don't know if any older folks remember this, but hey, someone raised their hand back there. Cadet Katie Miller, who would go on to graduate at the top of her class at Yale later on, but at the time she was at the top of her class at West Point, and a beast, like #1 military grade, top 5 academic, top 5 leaders. Just across the board, incredible. And not prior service, like direct high school at Met. She was incredible. And she came out at the end of my plebe year, at the end of her yuck year, sophomore year, on Rachel Maddow, in uniform. And this is a huge national story. And I remember just the surprising blowback against it. There were not only cadets, but I remember some faculty, officers, professionals in arms, who expressed their deep discontent with this. And so there was a cultural pushback against that at the time, and it took the ban ending, or being lifted essentially, and everyone realizing, oh, this never mattered. This never mattered to begin with. My coming out was essential through going in that process, because being at West Point, being in the military, made me really understand what I wanted out of life. I'm not sure that if I hadn't gone in the military that I would be out right now, to be honest with you. Because being in made me confront myself in a way that was painful and very necessary. And not just in terms of my gender identity, but also in terms of just who I was as a person, solidifying my value system, realizing that yes, I am a very progressive person. I do believe that these, certain, ideological values matter to me quite a bit. But then also overall in just terms of character, what it means to be an active citizen, what it means to engage in the public square in a way that is beneficial to everyone in the public square, not just some. So the military really instilled those values in me from the get-go. When I did eventually come out, I was very lucky in that I already had the support network. Because when I was in the closet, I would advocate against don't ask, don't tell while I was in the service, which is technically no, but I didn't do it in uniform, so we'll be okay with it. I was part of a network, not only just older veterans, veterans who had been out, and a lot of West Point grads, by the way, including Sue Fulton, who blazed a trail for a lot of folks. But these were folks who had served their country honorably with distinction, many of them in combat, who, really just made it safer for me to feel comfortable in coming out. The first person I told that I was transgender was Allison Robinson, West Point class of '87, who would go on to do a number of amazing things. But she's a trans woman and a very proud patriot. She's a pastor now. Just a lot of great things that she's done. But it was through that military camaraderie, through that Esprit de Corps, that I met other people who had those same value systems, who identified as queer, and who were able to show me how to navigate the world in a way that is authentic to who I am, while also not neglecting the parts of me that mattered, that I think a lot of people in this country would not necessarily associate with the LGBTQ community, which is wrong. To that point, who knows about Judith Miller, the New York Times reporter? Anyone? Well, I won't go into her backstory, but she released her memoir this year, and there was a huge controversy in that she essentially wrote about transgender people as though we are a fad, like we are the new youth trend, which is interesting to me because trans people go back to ancient Sumeria, to ancient Asia. You can see trans people in every culture, every religion, every race, every country. There are conservative trans people, liberal trans people. There are black, white, Asian trans people. There are on every continent, including in Antarctica, by the way. So trans people we're not tied to any kind of cultural fad. We just exist. Being trans is not a choice. The only choice that comes with being trans is whether or not you're going to come out of the closet. It's the only choice that's made in the whole process. And so she essentially writes this, and then she comes here for a talk, and I meet her afterwards. And I was just very clear with her that if you knew any trans person, you would know that we are just as boring as everybody else. Seriously, we have our 9-to-5s, we pay our taxes, we have kids. We have fights with our neighborhood association about the length of grass in our front yards. We are incredibly boring. Just like most Americans are boring, and because boring is fun, to be honest with you. When you don't have to worry about anyone bothering you and you could just live your life as everyone else, that's great. That's in fact what most trans people want, is to be as boring as everybody else. Believe it or not. It's true. And so, what I would insist to people is that we're not trying to get in anyone's crawl. We're just trying to be who we are. I spent 30 years praying to God every day to be stripped of this need to be a woman, without ever considering that perhaps my authenticity was natural to God's plan for me, without ever once considering that. I can't get that time back. It's gone forever. I will never be able to have all those years, and it breaks my heart. So what I would ask folks to do is to take a step back and educate yourselves. Understand the difference between gender identity and sexual orientation. Understand the process for transitioning. There are no young children who are being forced to take hormones. For some reason, that is a persistent myth that keeps getting perpetuated about trans people, and it is destructive, and it hurts them. You're doing more harm to trans kids by perpetuating that myth and thus stigmatizing their existence than understanding the process, relying on medical professionals, the American Medical Association, the American Psychological Association, the American Psychiatric Association, the American College of Pediatrics, all these organizations who clearly come out and said, yes, trans people are real. Yes, they are healthy individuals when they get sufficient treatment, which they deserve as human beings. And folks who are not medical professionals should keep the hell out of that conversation. Your job is to affirm trans people, and that's where your role ends. That's it.
Thank you.
Next question.
I have tons of questions, but I also want to have some time for our audience to ask some questions.
Yeah, we went a little long, didn't we?
There are 2 mics located on both aisles as well, if anyone needs help navigating the mics.
And please ask.
Or,
Yeah.
Excuse me, Lisa, mind if I ask the question from here?
Sure, use the microphone.
Oh, okay, thank you.
For everyone else.
All right. Excuse me, ladies, my question is
oh,
for...
please introduce yourself.
Oh, excuse me. Hi, I'm midshipman second class Lauren Bierman from the Naval Academy. Pleasure meeting you. All right, pleasure meeting you all. Thank you. My question for you is why you feel that it took some of you longer than others to realize your gender identity, and what you think could have been different that would have allowed you to realize you being transgender at an earlier age.
Wow.
The
You wanna
TARDIS.
go? Yeah.
To be able to change time is, it's one of those things that had the world been different in the 1970s, the world would have been different in the 1970s, and you can't do that. And I think Charlotte makes a really good point, time has changed. As bad as things are today, the world has changed. There is, the internet, the ability to have access to information, the ability to build community either in person or online provides that space for people to be able to explore who they are, be able to say who they are, and feel that there's some support. And I think, had that been in place, in the 1970s, and there had been a level of acceptance and we had changed the military regulations, I could have realized who I was in high school, I could have dealt with it in high school, and I could have gone to the Naval Academy, and I'd be a retired officer right now living on the beach. That can't be, because you can't go back and redo it, like Charlotte was saying.
I know for me, in the 70s, it was pretty tough. And here again, I didn't know anything about it from the internet or anything like that. I just thought I was a cross-dresser at the point, and dealing with things I was going through religiously, because I used to be even an altar boy. And to fight those, I guess, at that point, demons, whether you are who you are, and just thinking, all I just do is love to dress in women's clothes, that was a tough thing. And then finally, through the internet, eventually, because I never was on the internet before then, met some friends, and went to places, that trans people go to, but here again, not knowing, until she invited me to a conference called the Philadelphia Trans Health Conference. It's a free conference for 3 days, and once I went to that conference, I saw little kids 5, 6, and 7 years old who were having a blast. Their parents were supporting them and stuff. And so then I go to the workshops and I hear stories, and I went, wow, that's me. And if those little kids can do that, I know I can do it. But it took time because of the fact I was really afraid, because I love my family. And to hear the response that my brother, my dad, and my mom, really supporting me and saying, I love you unconditionally. But to hear my mom tell me when I was in her womb and she already had my name, that blew me away. I knew at that point, this is who I really am. So it took some time, and that's why I said my tagline is 40 years and wandering no more, because it took me 40 years to figure this crap out. But I did a lot of soul searching and praying about, why do I keep doing this? And I think God led me to the point of meeting this friend of mine who then told me about the conference, and that's how I came out. Now, I tell you one thing, I said, because a lot of people say, are you a little sorry that you didn't transition sooner? And I said, sometimes I think that way, but I think I would have been one of those wild child too if I had just transitioned earlier. But now at this point at my age, 63 as of last week, I think a lot of youth, I'm more mature and I know what I want, and that's where I'm at today.
Thank you very much, ladies. Appreciate it. Here, I'll give you the mic.
It's very important to point out that just like any vulnerable community, trans people are not all the same. It's not a monolith. Sorry. Whew. Anyone who's taken feminist theory in here will, be able to tell you about, the commonalities versus differences distinction. Women, for example, women as a whole, there are commonalities that all women share, and there are a lot of differences that all women have, and it's the same thing with trans people. I think it's interesting in how so many factors go into this, and it's not just geographical, which would be the easiest thing to say, right? There are folks who I imagine would think that trans people from the South, like me, might have a longer journey and be able to come out. Folks who grow up in very religious households. There might be, certain other factors. One of them that doesn't get discussed enough is sexual orientation. Gender identity is, the gender that you authentically identify with, right? Sexual orientation is who you're romantically and sexually attracted to. Two very different concepts. A lot of people conflate gay men and trans women together under the belief that trans women are attracted to gay men. No, that's not completely two different things. There are trans women who are attracted to just men, trans women who are attracted to just women, trans women who are bisexual, trans women who are pansexual or asexual. So, and it's interesting that you talk to trans women who might be attracted to men versus trans women who are attracted to women. That plays a factor in how fast you come out or how you feel in, on that journey toward authenticity. And so, what I think is very important, because I imagine the first question I get from almost everyone who walks up to me after one of these things is, what can I do to help? Which is a great question to ask. Give people space to be themselves and listen. Listen. I'll tell you this kernel truth. Coming out as trans, more than anything, has made me a better ally. I remember being in the closet and having questions about race or racism or white supremacy or ableism, things like that. And instead of doing the labor on my own, I would put that labor on people in those communities to teach me. And I think about that a lot now with a lot of guilt. I've actually had conversations with friends and apologized to them and, for not being more considerate. And they were cool about it, but, being out of the closet now, it feels like everyone wants people in those communities to do the labor of educating. And that's grueling. That's really hard, having to constantly define your humanity and defend it in these ongoing conversations about who you are. And so I would just encourage people to give space to folks in the trans community, get to know us, do the labor by yourself, read books. Google is a subscription-free service. You log on, you can go to the American Medical Association's webpage for trans people and figure out, actually a lot of kids, and mostly not trans, are actually gender expansive. Most cisgender kids are going to experiment with their gender a little bit when they're, at a young age. And that's totally fine. It's totally fine for that. It's very important that people recognize that gender is an ongoing journey for every person. Just like the debate over pronouns, for example, there's this anger, and what's missed in that is that pronouns are actually important to everybody. I assume, if you called Donald Trump she, her, or referred to him as she, her, he'd probably get angry because his pronouns are important to him. He identifies as he, him. Pronouns are important to everybody. Gender identity is important to everybody, not just trans and non-binary people. And so it's very important to just recognize that core of humanity at this discussion, that everyone has that through line.
I just wanted to add something real quick is there's one estimated 1.4 million transgender Americans in this country. That's a lot. But you know what? I call it DNA. And if you talk to each and every one of us in the 1.4 million, if you're that lucky, you're going to get 1.4 million different stories of our lives. None of us are the same. We're going to be very unique in some kind of way, but there's going to be something that's going to be a little bit different that set her off from me and what her journey's like, what my journey was like, how I transitioned, when I came out, and so on. There's a lot of transgender people who may have just started a month ago, and I've been doing this now 9 years. Woohoo. It's great. And I would hope, even just besides somebody who transitioned a month ago versus me 9 years ago, you want to treat that person the same. You don't want to treat them any different. They just started out. They're going to need your support. And we need you to stand up for us. You know, stand up. You know, if you hear something negative said about somebody, stand up. It's funny, one time I was sitting at NTB, and this guy was sitting right beside me, just like Paula is, and Wendy Williams' show comes on, and this guy goes ballistic, saying, "Oh, is that a dude dressed up as a girl and all this stuff?" And I looked at him, I said, "I'm transgender." And this guy totally turned white because he was so shocked that, you know, here he's sitting beside somebody that's trans and he's making fun of somebody. This is what I'm talking about. You need to stand up and give us support. Give us time, because that one person who's just transitioned a month ago, heck, he's going to look beautiful maybe later on down the road. So just, you know, be ready. They need to go through that process.
And we have a technical term for that, don't we?
Yeah,
It's called leadership.
exactly.
All right.
Was that me or
sorry.
you?
So part of the intention of joining the panel was to think about the policy implications for serving as your transgender. So I'd love to hear like what you infer the current policy feels like while serving for an individual as transgender, and where you think the time horizon is, like where policy could go for the military in terms of being more inclusive, or what do you see kind of unfolding with the situation?
Can I start?
Yeah.
Sorry to steal your mic.
Let's be very clear about this. This is a total ban on trans people in the military. The Pentagon wants to say that because there are 1,400 trans people who were out before the ban went into place, that they're grandfathered in, that it's not a ban. Those trans folks who are serving the military are severely stigmatized. They do not have access to medically necessary services, and their path to advancement in the military is now severely limited. You know, you midshipmen are going to get your OERs once you graduate. You know, your officer, you know, reviews, and those are going to be extremely important to your advancement. If a commander feels that a trans officer has very little, I guess, how should I say it, opportunity to move forward in their career, you're less likely to get a good review. Doesn't matter what happens in 3 or 4 years when this ban is hopefully, you know, knock on wood, lifted. People are stigmatized. So what ends up happening is that they're forced out. You have these bright, particularly young officers, captains, many trans people who are in you know, command positions right now, some of them serving overseas in deployments, many of them in combat, and they're being told essentially that they're not welcome. Their commander-in-chief is making it clear that they are not welcome in the military that he supposedly leads. He who did not serve a single day in uniform, who avoided service, who you know, had 5 draft deferments for a medical condition that I guess was never substantiated at all. A coward is telling these folks that they're not welcome in our military. And when that happens, they feel if they have no future, you know, why not just get out? Go to law school, go to business school, maybe become a public school teacher, you know, do service somewhere else, because if they're not welcome there, what's the point? That's what's being communicated right now. This is essentially a total ban. So here, to your question real quick, what happens next? Well, there are 2 things. There are several court cases that are working their way through the system right now. Supreme Court could maybe take those up next year. If that doesn't happen, regardless, the question that would be put before the Supreme Court is whether or not a president can essentially ban trans people from the military, right? It's not whether or not they should be banned, but whether or not a president can ban them. So regardless of what happens with the court cases, if someone, the next person who occupies the White House in 2021 and beyond, comes to their senses and lifts that executive order, everything's fine. Trans people can serve and serve honorably as they always have. So hopefully either way, that ban will be lifted with full effect and hopefully permanent effect, as it should have been many, many years ago.
It's interesting, real quick. I'm not sure if anybody saw this article. I want to say it was last year, and it was the president sitting on top of this building with, and I want to say it was the chief of staff. And if not, I'll just say that. But he's standing on top of this building, and here's this Scud missile heading toward the Capitol. And the chief of staff goes, "We could have taken that thing out of the air, but that person was transgender." We have a lot of trans people who are qualified, skilled in everything, and we put our time, effort, and resources into training them. And here you're going to get rid of us because we're transgender? You know, I feel I'm honored because of the fact that I got the awards I got for NCO Soldier of the Year and Soldier of the Year of the country, because they saw what I was bringing to the unit, not because I was transgender, because they didn't even know. And even still today, getting promoted last month to Master Sergeant, they see what I'm bringing to the organization. You know, right now, I do force protection, and I also am a chaplain's assistant. And when my commanding officer left the Maryland Defense Force, he's asking me to come join him over here with the United States Veterans Reserve Corps. Next thing I know, his wife, who's the chief of staff, they're both trying to pull me into their unit. And I'm like, it's nice to be fought for, that you want to be in that unit or that unit, because they see the value that you're bringing. And that's what President Trump doesn't seem to understand, because he hasn't served. You know, even though you are midshipmen and you're going to be in the Navy and stuff, we're family. I got your back just like you're going to have my back in battle if we go. So think of it like that.
Yeah, would you know, add to what Charles said, you know, and Karen said, is that, you know, one is that it is one team, one fight. You know, we can say all the Army Navy jokes we want. Unfortunately, we'll leave Air Force out of that. You guys are the default. When we talk about the policy, is understand what some people call the Mattis policy, trying to paint it that it is something different than merely implementing what the president said in his tweets in 2017. If you aren't in the military today and you're transgender and you want to join the military, you can't. Unless you are stable in your biological sex, and as you know, someone who runs a Center for Transgender Health, that term is meaningless. And it absolutely ignores who transgender people are. You can't serve. You can say, I'm transgender, but I'm stable in my biological sex, and I will never transition while I'm in the military. If you've had any kind of gender-affirming treatment, you are forever banned from joining the military under this policy. The most effective medical treatment for dealing with gender dysphoria is gender-affirming treatment. But the military will say, well, you can get a waiver. In the 50 years prior to 2016 and the change in policy, not one waiver had ever been granted to a transgender person to join the United States military, so it's absolutely disingenuous. As Charlotte mentioned about this safe harbor group, the 1,400, they can be out, they can go to the dock, but the thousands of others who didn't get a diagnosis of gender dysphoria in their medical record prior to April 12th of this year can't. They can say they're transgender. They're not going to get kicked out for that. But if they say they need to transition, if they say they need to access medically necessary care, they're subject to administrative separation. So that you can serve, but you can forego your health in order to do that. That's what this policy is. And for the folks at the 1,400, this is a policy of attrition. As soon as they're gone, the administration's aim of having a transgender-free military, an openly transgender-free military, would be obtained. Transgender folks are going to continue to serve. All three of us are examples that transgender people called to serve will serve. That won't change. The other aspect about policy has to do with the core values of the military. Every service has their own different way of saying it, but it's basically honor, courage, and commitment. When Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed, the argument that was its death knell was said by the then chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mike Mullen, Naval Academy, class of '68. That Don't Ask, Don't Tell stained the integrity of the institution, as well as the individual. We should never ask someone to lie about who they are, merely to serve. And we can't have core values of honor and integrity, courage, and expect people to lie to us, because that corrodes the core values of the institution. And for those of you in the Navy, the Chief of Naval Operations, who happens to be a classmate of mine, just recently made a very strong statement about integrity and about character. And when we talk about this issue of transgender folks, to those allies, most of the people in the service are cisgender folks. Is when you talk about having honor, when you talk about having integrity, it means talking about this issue based on the facts, based on military necessity, based on medical science. And as Charlotte mentioned earlier, all of the justifications for this policy from the current administration are fabrications. They're not grounded in reality. I can say that because I'm one of the experts that was involved in changing the regulations. I was one of the people involved in getting rid of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and I'm a naval officer. The rationales, the way I phrased it is, they were bovine fecal matter when it was used in the 1940s, because I know we're getting recorded, so I'm not going to curse.
Like me.
And they're still that today.
Nick, I know we got to move on. Can I add two more things real quick?
Absolutely.
I promise I'll be quick. There is absolutely nothing about trans people that precludes them from honorable military service from a medical standpoint. Every major medical authority has come out and said this. The American Medical Association released this fire press release back in April when the ban officially went into effect, saying we have no sufficient reason why trans people can't serve in the military. Former military surgeons general released a report essentially saying the same thing, that we can't point to anything, any reason why trans people can't serve honorably. As uniformed officers, we have nothing, and medical experts, we have nothing saying they can't serve. And then, so we have the unit readiness, we have the medical reasons, and then the third piece is the budgetary reasons, which was the original thing that Donald Trump cited in that tweet, that infamous tweet, claiming that it would put too much of financial strain on the military. Even before the ban was officially lifted in 2016 under the last administration, the DoD and the RAND Institute did a study on this, and they found that it was negligible at best. They said something like between 4 and 8 million. The lower bound cost would be 4 million annually. The upper bound would be 8 million. Anyone want to guess what the actual cost over 3 years was on average? 2.6 million. 2.6 million. 2.6 million. That is a fraction of 1% of the overall healthcare budget for the military. Not the military budget overall, the healthcare budget for the military, less than 1% of that. The military parade that was scheduled under this current administration that was going to cost something like $90 million, that would fund trans-related healthcare for the next 45 years. The supposed Space Force that was proposed this year, that would fund trans-related healthcare for the next 47,000 years. Cost is not an issue. Medical conditions are not an issue. There is no medical condition. And then finally, the unit readiness and military cohesion thing. So there are no reasons why trans people can't serve. The only reason a trans person couldn't serve is if they couldn't meet the standard. And then I guarantee you all three of us would be the first person to say, yeah, boot their ass out. If they can't meet the standard, they shouldn't be in the military. That's it.
One thing that President Trump thought and said is because of the cost. not every transgender person wants to go through the full surgery. That's the important thing. Either they can't medically or they're afraid to, but they have their own personal reason, but it doesn't change the matter who they are. They are who they are because that's who we are in our mind, heart, and spirit. It's got nothing to do with, oh, I'm joining the military because I want to get the surgery. No, we joined the military because we wanted to serve our country. And that's the reason why. It had nothing to do with surgery.
If we can afford $100 million annually on erectile dysfunction drugs, we can afford the money for trans-related health care, hands down.
Yeah, and something Carrie just mentioned about, you're going to hear the argument, well, people will just join the military so that they can get surgery. Folks, a smart transgender person is going to go work for Starbucks. They have better health care benefits for transgender people than the military, and they have the added benefit is they don't get sent places where people are trying to blow them up.
And who is the largest employer of trans people in the world, by the way?
The military.
The military. The United States military. Successfully, might I add. Right,
He's
sorry.
been standing for a while. That's okay.
One final question.
Hi, y'all. My name is Javon Price. I am an Airman First Class, United States Air Force Reserve, HUA, and I'm also a Cadet Lieutenant Colonel in the Air Force RDC Detachment in Washington, D.C. So I've been to boot camp and officer training, both. And one thing I've seen, a particular issue, and I know it's kind of niche, but I've been wondering, specifically, I don't think there's any infrastructure, not to the fault of the military necessarily, but from the people funding us to support transgender troops in regards to like dormitories. And I know Master Sergeant had spoken about this before. Like, I don't know if how they would integrate via like shower structures, or if there has to be certain different infrastructure. I've honestly never met a transgender person serving, so I don't really know the issues. I'm coming at this completely, blind. And I'm not saying this as a point of saying you shouldn't serve. I'm just saying there should be resources to make sure that that transgender people are comfortable serving and they have all the resources necessary. So I guess my question is, if you could expand on necessarily, I guess, some of the needs of the transgender community besides just, healthcare wise. I mean, logistically, I just don't know if there is the infrastructure. I know this is kind of,
Sure.
I don't mean to be contentious if I can, but I like, showering at boot camp, what if there was a transgender, airman who wasn't comfortable? Then, are they just shit out of luck? Like they just can't go anywhere, which I think is messed up. How do you deal with that?
The
That's point I'm
easiest
trying to
thing,
make.
real quick, just simple. You got the shower head there. Just put a rod and a curtain around, and that's it. I don't think there's any other issue because that was the only thing I was worried about.
Mm-hmm.
And if they had did that, that would have been a done deal.
There's no special dormitories that are needed.
No.
There's no special birthing apartments that are needed. Yeah, the cost of a shower curtain in the shower, or allow folks to wear shower shorts when they're taking a shower if that's much of an issue. And one of the things to understand about all the, those are appropriate questions to ask. And the military asked them. In the 1-year review before the policy was changed, the military asked and answered all of those questions about how are we going to do this.
And how many years again was that successful?
And
That was 3 years successful in a military system. How many incidents? 0 million active duty service members, 14,000 trans people, maybe 2,000 or 3,000 who are out in the open, 0 incidents of using facilities with trans people. It's very important that we do the work, that we do the research, that we approach these subjects with nuance, and that we do the labor of understanding where people are coming from. It's critical.
In this country, there's not been one issue of any transgender person attacking a woman or any type of thing like that in this country. And that's the biggest lie that they've been telling everybody, that, oh, I don't want my child or my wife in the bathroom with a trans person. They're going to get attacked. It's not going to happen because it hasn't happened. We're in there to do the same thing as anybody else, go either pee or take a dump.
In fact, there have been more U.S. senators caught in illegal sexual acts in restrooms in this country in the last 10 years than anything having to do with trans women. And what do people think women do when they go in the restroom? You go into the stall, you do your business, you wash your hands, you leave. If you go to a club, you might get drunk and, tell a fellow woman that she looks gorgeous, I mean, that's it. There is nothing inappropriate going on in the restroom. But for some reason, we have these weird stories that pop up of, some cisgender man claiming he's a woman or something, and he's not even, I mean, it's absurd. It's absolutely absurd. And if anyone had approached this in good faith, did the research, and tried to come at it from a point of integrity, from an approach of integrity, they would know this. But the folks who are anti-trans don't want to do that. They don't want to put that labor in, they don't want to approach it with integrity, and this is what happens. Confusion where none should exist. People shouldn't have to worry about this. People have jobs and kids and things that they should be concerned with. Our country should not be debating who someone loves or who they are, ever.
Yeah, the only thing that should matter for us is, are they a good shipmate? Do they do their job? Can they put rounds on target? That's about it.
I know at my job, because I work with the federal government, and I've been there for almost 18 and a half years. But anyway, when I came out to my supervisor, the only thing she said to me when we told her the news is, as long as you do your job, I could care less whether you're blue, black, or green, or whatever, and I love you. That's all that mattered to her. She just wanted to make sure I did my job because that's what I was hired to do. And that's the same thing as far as in the service. I want to make sure you got my back, that you got my back, I got your back. That's all that matters. That's what we call, as you'll know more of, a battle buddy. Okay?
Well, Charlotte, Karen, Paula, I have your back. I'd like to introduce Lene Hazel, the Director of the Veterans Office, for our closing remarks. Our panelists will also be available for questions following the end of the event.
I will keep this brief because I know I'm holding up the reception at this point now, but I feel best about expressing my sincere thanks to Paula, Karen, and Charlotte for being here tonight, your courage, sharing your stories with us, because we all play a role in how we can be inclusive in our day-to-day interactions, whether that is while we're supporting service members who identify as transgender in the military, or once they have transitioned and become veterans. And with the intersectionality that we all play a role in our various backgrounds, our various experiences, and so forth, I think the notion of taking the time to listen, to understand, and to find a way as to how we can help in our various roles, and having opportunities like this tonight is pivotal for us to play a role in creating inclusive spaces no matter where we are in the world. So thank you again for being here tonight. Thank you to Nick for moderating today and bringing us. So with that.
Oh, wait, we have gifts. Oh, yeah. From, thank you. From Spectra Alliance as well as the LGBTQ Research Center, we come bearing gifts. Everyone, I thought that you can never go wrong with too many tote bags. So thank you.
Thanks.